Hello and welcome to Topic 2, Lecture 1. And in this lecture, we're going to focus on the Declaration of Independence. So, if you haven't already, I want to make sure that you read Topic 2 Commentary. Topic 2 Commentary kind of gives you a broad outline of the first and second founding of the United States, okay? There's a lot more details in your textbook, but it's helpful if you sort of understand what the difference between the first and the second founding is. The first founding is, basically, the time period prior to the Revolutionary War, and then a few years after the end of the Revolutionary War. So from the 1750s to the early 1780s. Okay. And so it's in this time period where there's rising tensions due to the French and Indian War. The colonists don't want to pay taxes. They actually do want to pay taxes, but they want representation. They don't feel that they are willing to pay their fair share, but they feel like they should get a say in governance. And so, and the main two documents that are associated with the first founding are the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, which you'll learn about in the second lecture. And in the lecture today, in this lecture, we're focusing on the Declaration of Independence. The second founding goes from the 1780s to the 1790s. It's known as the second founding because it's basically the first Constitution of the United States, the Articles of Confederation. It doesn't work, and they come up with a new Constitution, and that's the United States Constitution, which again we dig into in detail in the second lecture. It's also the Federalist Papers, where the Federalist Papers are the essays that are printed in newspapers throughout the United States, making an argument in favor of why the United States Constitution should be ratified. There were also the anti-federalists who were arguing, saying, no, this Constitution gives way too much power to the national government. And then the Bill of Rights, and that's why it goes to the 1790s, because as a part of the compromise to get the United States Constitution ratified by the states demanded that the first action of this new national government under this new Constitution, that the first action should be the creation and the adoption of the Bill of Rights. And that's exactly what happened. And so make sure that you read about that in the textbook and in the commentary, because it'll help you understand these lectures a lot more. So what are we going to be doing in this lecture? Well, first we're going to summarize the purpose of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to examine the influence of the Enlightenment political philosophy on the founding documents, in particular the Declaration of Independence in this lecture. And then we're going to talk about some key Enlightenment philosophical concepts, okay? And these concepts are embedded in our founding documents, in particular the Declaration of Independence. And so we're going to be using this information in this lecture about those key philosophical concepts. You're going to be identifying for the midterm exam. One of the questions is going to be that you're going to identify these concepts in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, you're going to learn about these concepts, then you're going to show me how they actually are embedded and play themselves out in the Declaration of Independence. Then you're explaining to me why is this part of the Declaration related to the right to revolt, for example, okay? So that's what we're going to do in this lecture, okay? And then it also gives you insight to what we're going to be doing as we get closer to the midterm exam. So when the colonies decide that they want to break ties with from the British monarchy, that they basically create a de facto national government, and it's known as the Second Continental Congress. Okay, and it's the Second Continental Congress that is basically in charge of. They have delegates from all 13 states, and they're charged with declaring independence, and then making an argument for why their break from Great Britain is justified. And so one of the things that the Continental Congress does is that they form a committee to write the Declaration of Independence. And the committee is comprised of three attendees at the Second Continental Congress that's like looking at this question of should we declare independence, because not everybody wanted to declare independence. Not all the delegates wanted to fight a revolutionary war. And so, this was being debated. But the Second Continental Congress forms a committee to write up this Declaration of Independence. And the committee is comprised of three people, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. Thomas Jefferson, as you probably know, is a Virginian. John Adams is a New Englander. He's from Massachusetts. And Benjamin Franklin is from Pennsylvania. So the three of them represent different states. And when that committee was formed, the decision was made of, well, who's going to actually write this? It wasn't collectively written. It was kind of Jefferson writes a rough draft, and then Adams and Franklin weigh in on it and make recommended changes, okay, which Jefferson didn't like. But Adams says that there are three reasons why Jefferson should be the one who writes the draft. His first reason is that it needs to come from a Virginian. The Virginian needs to be behind this pen of the Declaration of Independence, because Virginia was the most populous state at the time, right? And so it needed to have the weight of a large state. Another reason was that Adams said was he was not well liked, and that was true. He was a man who did not spare his words, and he would tell people how he felt, and not everybody liked him. He was kind of a bossy head. And so he said, it can't come from somebody like me because people will discount it. And then finally he said, Jefferson, you're just a much better writer than I am. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. They're both prolific writers, but that, I guess you had to appeal to, Jefferson's ego. And so Jefferson is the one who drafts it, and then Adams and Franklin give feedback. Now, the thing to keep in mind about the Declaration of Independence is it is a political manifesto. Okay. And what that means is that it is a document that is expressing values. Okay. That it's basically saying these are the things that we think are very important values. These values are being violated, and that we are not going to put up with the violation of these very important values. And so it identifies the values that lead to the separation, that lead to the colonies leaving the monarchy. And then it provides evidence for why the separation is necessary and justified, right? It is not a constitution, okay? And we're going to take a look at it in a moment. Hopefully you've already read through the Declaration of Independence. But it's not a constitution. It doesn't tell us anything about how this new government is going to be organized. That comes from the Articles of Confederation. But this is a statement of values. And a lot of people say it's where the American creed is laid out. That if there's one thing that you need to know to be an American, what it means to be an American is to know what those values are and to live up to those values, or at least try to live up to those values. And we saw that in some of what you wrote last week in your America Is discussion. And so that's what the Declaration of Independence is. Another thing that the Declaration of Independence is that it's a product of the Enlightenment, okay? That the men who were at the Second Continental Congress and then later at the the Constitutional Convention, these were learned men. They were many of them were lawyers, very well educated, and they were educated in the Enlightenment tradition. So what does that mean? So they stood on the shoulders of Enlightenment philosophers. The Enlightenment was a philosophical movement. It dominated in Europe during the 18th century. And it was basically this turning point, right, where there was a move towards prioritizing reason over religious faith, right? And that it was reason, whether that was through scientific inquiry, whether that was through logical analysis and philosophy, whether it was paying close attention to biology, right? and the workings of the earth, and that scientific investigation, those logical like pursuits of seeing is this argument reasonable, that is what should basically serve as the primary source of authority and legitimacy, not religious faith. Okay. And so, this was a turning point. I mean, Galileo, physicist who, looks at the physical world and comes back and says that, oh, no, it's not, everything doesn't revolve around the earth. Actually, everything revolves around the sun. And the Catholic Church didn't like that, right? And in fact, Galileo was persecuted for that, right? Well, this is not that. This is where you say reason must prevail. And so the folks at the Continental Congress, and they were a product of that. The Enlightenment also promoted classical liberal ideas, liberal small l. We're not talking about an ideological modern tradition of liberalism. We're talking about the classical liberals. Those classical ideas were about freedom, about human freedom, that people are born free and that they should have the ability to pursue what they want to pursue, and that government shouldn't stand in the way of that. Seeing democracy, rule of the people, was the best form of government. That if given education, if given time to improve, if given the nurturing that a human needs, that they can do great things and bring about progress. And also the idea of tolerance, right? This idea that we all have different views and those different views should be respected. And it's reasonable to say that no one view is maybe, or value set is maybe a dominant over the other. You listen to people, and actually through that listening, then you find knowledge, okay? And to do that, you have to have tolerance of others. The key thinkers from this time period, and I beg you to take a political social philosophy class, because that you're going to learn a lot more in that class. It would be a useful companion to this. But are Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Baron de Montesquieu. Those were the ones that had most influence over the founders and then later the framers. And in fact, if you read John Locke's Second Treatise on Government, you really see a lot of echoing of, and sometimes just direct echoing from what John Locke, was writing. It's sort of Thomas Jefferson pays homage to him. So the first Enlightenment philosopher that we are going to focus on is really for like almost pre-Enlightenment, right? But is considered early Enlightenment. And this is the writer, the political philosopher, Thomas Hobbes. And he wrote his book Leviathan in 1651. Thomas Hobbes is the first modern philosopher to come up with what's known as the social contract theory. And that, basically one of the things that Thomas Hobbes was really concerned about was chaos. He wrote during a time of civil war, and so he knew what it was like to have governments that were found to be illegitimate and broke down, and the war that comes out of that, and just how soul-crushing and body-crushing living through civil war can be. And so in Leviathan, he imagines this state. And he basically says, okay, imagine that there is this place, and that it has no government. There's no government at all. It's just people. Okay, there's no government to set the laws. There's no government to tell you can or cannot do this. And he calls that the state of nature. But he also says that that state of nature is a state of war. It is, one of his famous quotes is that the state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short. That when you give people, and again, kind of a negative view of human nature, that when you give people full liberty and there's no government, right, it's going to be like Lord of the Flies, right? That basically that not only are you just, those with the power are going to trample on those who don't have power, but you're constantly under fear of being attacked, of being assaulted, and you just can't get anything done, right? You're constantly on alert. And so he says that there's a way to get out of that. And that the way that you get out of that is that the people agree to this thing called a social contract. And the social contract creates civil society, gets us out of the state of nature. And what the social contract is that it's basically that individuals consent to give up some of their rights in order to get protection from the sovereign. He's not arguing for democracy. He's saying that we need to, have people agree to a sovereign who is going to protect you and to provide this safe space for you to live, and that there are certain things that we ask the sovereign to do in return. It's this social contract. When you imagine a place where you can do whatever you want, the state of nature, there might be some good things about that. You could really do whatever you want. If you wanted that house, you get some guns and go take it, right? If you're really strong and powerful, that you'd have maximum liberty. I wouldn't want to live in that society. And so basically it's sort of saying, look, you give up maximum liberty. You give up doing whatever the F you want to do. You follow the rules, and what you get in exchange is stability, civil society. He was the first modern European philosopher to think this way about government, to think about government being this relationship between the governed, those who are being governed over, and the one who is doing the governing, right? And so that was landmark in terms of sort of thinking about the people have this opportunity to say, I'm going to give up some of my rights, but what I'm expecting from you in return, government, is that you're going to make sure that I live in a safe society, that you look out for my well-being. And if you fail to do that, there might be some consequences. The other Enlightenment philosopher that contributed to the founders' ideals are John Locke. Now, in this lecture, we're just talking about John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. We're not going to be talking about Montesquieu. Montesquieu was really influenced the framers in terms of the separation of powers, checks and balances, and sort of more of the institutions of government. But it's John Locke and Hobbes that really sort of influenced the values and ideals that we see in the Declaration of Independence. So John Locke takes Thomas Hobbes a step farther, okay? Basically, John Locke says, sure, the civil contract's a great idea, or the social contract's a great idea. We give up some of our rights, and then you provide us order, sovereign. But John Locke says that is not enough. Living in an ordered society where you're not going to be murdered, okay, that is not enough. The government must protect our property. Government must protect our life and livelihood, right? And that government needs to protect our freedoms, right? That we have the freedom to make choices of how we want to live our lives. And he goes even farther, and he says that these are natural rights, right? That these are rights that are just come from being a human, and everybody has the right to life, property, liberty, etc. Okay, and that what's really sort of radical about that idea is that these aren't rights that come from God. They're natural rights. They come from virtue of just being human. That they come from nature, right? Not from God. And they certainly don't come from the sovereign. There's something, these rights come from beyond the human institutions of government. It's something that is natural, and therefore governments, are bound to hold up and protect those rights. John Locke again, pushes it farther and says that government's authority to rule actually comes from the people, right? And so that in the social contract that we give up our rights and the sovereign protects us. But for John Locke, it's a two-way street, right? It wasn't with Thomas Hobbes. It's sort of like, hey, we give up our rights, you protect our life, our liberty, our property. And if you fail to do that, then you lose your legitimacy. You lose your authority, because the people are the ones that have that authority. The government's authority comes from the people. And as I said, that the human rights are independent of that contract, right? It's not like, oh, the contract's null and void, now you don't have any of those rights. No, it comes from something beyond that human government contract, okay? And then, you see this in the Declaration of Independence. because a government authority to rule comes from the people, John Locke argues that you have a right to revolt. That if a tyrant is consistently violating your natural rights, you have a duty, you have an obligation to overthrow that tyrant. And that overthrow can in fact be justified. Okay, so that's a famous painting of Thomas Jefferson, right? And, this lecture is sort of like Thomas Jefferson, look at all the good words he wrote, right? But keep in mind that we are also doing a discussion this week that kind of has the counter to that about whether or not the founders and the framers should be celebrated, right? So just keep that in mind as we read through the Declaration of Independence. All right, so I want you to take a moment, pause this video, and I want you to get out the Declaration of Independence. It's in the back on the appendix of your textbook. There's also a link to it in Topic 2 Overview, okay? And I'm a nerd, okay? And we did this when I used to teach face-to-face. And I'd pick on students to actually read it. But we are going to read the first 2 paragraphs aloud. Because yes, I am a nerd. And on July 4th, no July 4th goes by where we do not read, not just the first 2 paragraphs, but the entire Declaration of Independence, usually back by the fire pit with, some nice French wine to celebrate the French and their alliance with us during the Revolutionary War. So locate the deck and then we'll come back together. So welcome back. So here's the first 2 paragraphs. And you're going to be watching a great video about these first 2 paragraphs from Danielle Allen today as well. Make sure that you watch it. Danielle Allen has written a great book about the Declaration of Independence if you're interested in looking it up. So in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferances of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. That's probably one of my favorite lines. And then after that, if you read, it's a listing of all of the facts that demonstrate that the King of Great Britain is indeed a tyrant. Okay, so that brings us to the political theory concepts that are found in the Declaration of Independence and that are derived primarily from the work of John Locke, but obviously with the assistance, the great assistance of Thomas Hobbes as it relates to the social contract, okay? And the idea for the midterm exam is you'll have an opportunity to reflect on the Declaration in general, but then you will be asked to locate these concepts within the language of those first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. And so the concepts that we're going to define are social contracts, natural rights, popular sovereignty, and the right to revolt. Let's take a look. Okay, so we've talked about the social contract in this lecture so far. We've talked about it in terms of the way that Thomas Hobbes wrote about it, and then we talked about the way John Locke kind of tweaked it, brought it more into a more modern conception of the social contract. And so, we've talked about the social contract, but basically the social contract is an agreement between people and their government that defines the rights and the duties of each. So this agreement defines what the rights and duties of the people are, but it also defines what the rights and duties of the government are as well. And so in the midterm exam, what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to have you reflect on the document in general, but then I'm going to have you, identify within the language of the Declaration of Independence, those two first paragraphs, where reference to the social contract is made. And then you're going to explain to me why you think this is a representation of the social contract. The next concept is the concept of natural rights. And so natural rights are, as we mentioned, they're the rights that are granted to people by nature or by nature's God or God. But the founders are very specific in terms of the language that they use. Nature's God. It's like they put nature ahead of God. And so it's the rights that are granted to the people by nature or nature's God just by virtue of being born. And that government doesn't confer these rights, but nature or nature's God does. And they include fundamental freedoms such as equal treatment, self-determination, life, etc. Okay? And so I'll be asking you, where in the deck do you find the natural rights? Next is popular sovereignty, which is a concept we've already talked about in topic 1. And so it's the idea that the political and governmental authority ultimately rests in the hands of the people, that the supreme authority to rule rests with the people. And so that if you are violating the rights of the people and you're not living up, if government doesn't live up to its end of the social contract, it's basically government begins to lose that authority, okay? And so again, you'll be identifying where popular sovereignty is referenced. And then finally, the right to revolt. So the right to revolt is this duty or obligation of the people to overthrow a government that persistently acts against the well-being and common interest of the people. That it's justified only if the government is violating the common rights and general interests of the people, and government has no grounds for these kinds of violations, that there's no reason, justified reason, for why the government is interfering or acting against the common interest or the well-being of the people. So again, keep that in mind for application purposes. And so for the midterm exam, that we're going to go back to the text of the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to tell you that you can use the first two, that you must use the first two paragraphs, but you could use the whole body of the Declaration of Independence if you wanted to as well, to bring these concepts to light. And then I want you to see if you can locate these different concepts within the two first paragraphs or beyond of the Declaration of Independence, the natural rights, the social contract, the popular sovereignty, and the right to revolt, okay? So that slide's a little bit redundant, but that's what you'll be asked to do on the midterm exam. Okay, that's it for me for lecture 1. In lecture 2, you're going to be learning about the United States Constitution. Thanks for listening and paying attention. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again soon.